this video, we're going to explore the relationship between leadership and power. First, let's talk about leadership versus power. Now, leadership and power, they're closely connected, but they are not the same. Leadership involves using power and influence to guide followers toward achieving goals. On the other hand, power is simply the ability to influence others and resist being influenced in return. Leaders use their power to motivate, direct, and align their teams. However, power can exist without leadership. For example, a person can have the power to control resources, but may not inspire or guide others. Understanding this distinction helps clarify the dynamics at play in organizations. Next, let's examine the types of power that leaders possess. Leaders typically have two broad categories of power: organizational power and personal power. First, let's talk about organizational power. There are different types of it. First is legitimate power. This is the power that comes from holding a formal position or title within the organization. So you simply have the title of CEO, you are a legitimate power. Leaders can use this authority to direct other people. Another type of organizational power is reward power. This is the ability to give out rewards like raises, promotions, or praise. Another type of organizational power is coercive power. The flip side of the reward power, coercive power, involves the capacity to punish or apply negative consequences for poor personal performance or rule breaking. Another type of personal power is referent power. This comes from being likable or charismatic. Followers want to identify with and be associated with leaders they admire. The most influential leaders often use a combination of both organizational and personal power. Next, let's get into influence tactics. Leaders don't just rely on power, but they use various tactics to influence other people. And some tactics are more effective than others. First, let's talk about the most effective influence tactics. These include things like rational persuasion. This is where you influence people by using logic, facts, and rational arguments. It's a really strong way to influence people, especially when they respect your expertise. Another effective tactic is consultation. So you're consulting with others. You're getting them involved in the decision-making process, helping them feel more committed to the outcome. Another effective approach is inspirational appeals. This is where you appeal to someone's values or emotions, and it's a really powerful way to rally support. Another effective tactic is collaboration. This is where you offer to work together toward a shared goal. It's showing that you're invested in the success of the group. Now let's talk about some tactics that are moderately effective. One is ingratiation. This is where you flatter someone or you brown nose your boss. You try to win favor. It can work, but it's not as reliable as the other tactics we just discussed. Personal appeals. This is where you ask for help based on personal relationships. It can sometimes be effective. Apprising. This is showing someone how their involvement will benefit them personally. It can help, but it's not always the most persuasive. Now let's talk about the least effective tactics. One is pressure, using threats, coercion, demands. This can work sometimes, but it generally tends to backfire and can actually damage relationships. Coalitions. Getting others to gang up on someone and show strength in numbers, that rarely leads to lasting solutions. And exchange. Offering something in return for compliance, like a quid pro quo, it can work, but it doesn't build lasting trust. Now let's talk about conflict management styles. Leaders also need to know how to manage conflict in the workplace. There are a lot of different approaches, and the right one depends on the situation. So let's discuss some common approaches. One is competing. This style involves pursuing your own interests at the expense of others. It can be effective when quick decisions are needed, but it obviously might create some tension. The next approach is collaborating. This is approaching a win-win strategy. This style seeks to find a solution that satisfies everyone involved. It's often the best for complex issues. The next approach is avoidance. Leaders sometimes sidestep conflict or kind of put their head in the sand when an issue arises if it's minor or if emotions are running too high. Accommodating. This is where you give in to the other side, and it can preserve relationships, but it might not be sustainable in the long run. And compromise. This is a middle ground approach. This involves both sides giving something up in order to reach a solution, and it can be effective, but it might not satisfy everyone completely. Next, let's look at distributive versus integrative negotiations. Negotiation is a key part of leadership, and there are two main approaches to it: distributive and integrative. First, let's talk about distributive negotiation. This is a win-lose scenario. You're distributing the pieces of the pie and someone's gonna get it all and someone's gonna get none. With distributive negotiation, one party's gain comes at the other person's expense. We often see this in highly competitive environments. An integrative negotiation approach, in contrast, seeks a win-win outcome, so everybody gets some of the pie. With this strategy, both sides feel like they've gained something. This approach builds better relationships and often leads to more sustainable agreements. To negotiate successfully, leaders should aim for integrative outcomes whenever it's possible. They should listen actively and they should look for shared interests. Next, let's take a look at why some leaders are more powerful than others. Not all leaders are equally powerful, and this often boils down to how well they utilize both organizational and personal power. Leaders who combine formal authority with expert knowledge or strong relationships are generally more effective. Leaders with a wider range of influence tactics and the ability to adapt to different situations tend to have more sustained power over time.